You are Sony in the late 90s. You just released the PS1 a couple of years ago and won the console war. But technology is evolving faster than ever before. Victory is temporary. The Sega Dreamcast just released and it looks better than anything else. Sony Music has everyone listening to them, half of the TVs and cameras are manufactured by Sony, and everyone you know carries a Walkman or a Discman. In the mid and late 90s, Sony established itself as a force to be reckoned with in the gaming industry. The PlayStation was a big success, and the use of CD-ROM, full-motion video playback, and the general speed and the power of the console made it more successful than the N64. But Sony wanted more. They wanted to create technology that could convey convincing emotions, deliver earnest messages, and create experiences unlike anything the world had ever seen up until then. Ridge Racer's 5 intro is entirely real-time at 60 frames per second, but it looks like something you would expect to find in a pre-rendered cutscene. Lots of jump cuts, high polygon models, and impressive text and background effects that carry that Y2K Gen X soft club aesthetic. As for Ai Fukami's character model, the geometric complexity and animation quality are a lot better than anything released that same year. Compare her animations to Deus Ex or Shenmue 2. It's full of smart visual design and it's probably the first game to ever feature real-time depth of field post-processing effects. It is pushing around 35,000 polygons per frame at 60 frames per second. Things like barriers and mountains are fully modeled. Even buildings have reflections, despite this being the first PS2 game ever made. The cars also use scrolling reflection maps that would change when you were driving outdoors or inside a tunnel. The game also featured a beautiful sun glare effect. We've seen lens flares on the N64 and on the PlayStation 1 as well, but a high color gradient used to represent the glow of a low-hanging sun wasn't common. The art team crafted something truly magnificent. I think Sony was successful. To this day, the PS2 is the best-selling video game console of all time, with over 160 million units sold and over 10,000 games released. Cruising through the streets of Ridge City at midnight, as smooth electric jazz music plays in the background, is a great feeling that any PlayStation 2 enjoyer will be familiar with. It's the turn of the millennium and there was only one question. How do we do it again? The PS1 was a big success, but times were changing rapidly. One bad choice could ruin the whole video game sector of Sony, the same way Atari or Sega did it. They were trying to innovate and keep up with new trends, but this came with a big cost. Nvidia started releasing graphics cards that made console graphics look dated. If consoles couldn't match PC graphics, why would anyone buy a console? Sony realized they were fighting a war for the future of entertainment itself. They had to create something new. They had to create the PlayStation 2. Details of the console were revealed at E3 1999 and the Tokyo Game Show. First of all, the PS2 was fully backwards compatible with PS3 games, not through emulation. They embedded the entire PS1 graphics chip inside the PS2 as the input-output processor. It cost a lot to manufacture, but it guaranteed perfect compatibility. Second, the PS2 would have online functionality, much like the Dreamcast, with its built-in modem, and unlike the Xbox, where players would have to pay a subscription fee to use Xbox Live. The PS2's online functionality was completely free to use. Another crucial thing for the system's success was its DVD playback capabilities. DVD as a format was a very big deal when the console was released. Funnily enough, the PS2 was also cheaper than most DVD players released at the time. Finally, the hardware of the PlayStation 2 was so overpowered that it raised military concerns. In this era, the line between reality and digital started to blur. Many developers like Team Silent for Silent Hill 2 opted to use real-life photos to create environments and textures for their games instead of drawing them. This is one of the reasons why many indie developers fail to recreate the PS2 look. For example, the public bathroom from the beginning of the game looks like a real place because it is a real place. They took photos of real tiles with real wear and tear on them and then scaled them down. When the player is finally handed control, many players thought it was still a pre-rendered cutscene and were waiting for the game to switch. But it was real time, all along. They also managed to avoid that tiled look that many old games were known for. Not many people know this, but there is a game on the PS2 that is capable of rendering 65,000 individual on-screen enemies all running at 60 frames per second. This game is called Ikusugami, and thanks to modern emulation, we can peek behind the curtains to better understand how a game like this was achieved on the hardware. The enemies that are further from the camera are rendered as 2D images, similarly to Doom, and in reality, the enemies work as an instanced particle cloud. They are basically groups. No wonder Final Fantasy's designer Kazuhiko Aoki revealed that back in the 90s, Final Fantasy IX was supposed to be tested on a PlayStation 2, but shipping to the team in Hawaii was complicated because of the device's overpowered CPU. Eventually the developers received the console, but it took some time. It was a very difficult situation. Sony partnered with Toshiba to create the new CPU for their new console, the Emotion Engine. Paralleling Ken Kutaragi's statement that the system would be able to convey unprecedented emotions, if you take a look at the many tech demos that were released in 1999, you can clearly see the power of what the PlayStation 2 can do. These demos all ran in real time, and the thing that really stood out to me is that the graphics were a huge leap compared to the PS1. It's a single highest technological jump from one console to another. No wonder why the US government classified the Emotion Engine as a supercomputer and temporarily restricted its export. A chip capable of simulating missile trajectories was being sold for $299. But each chip costs more than $100 to manufacture. Sony lost money on every PS2 sold. They were betting on making it back on games. One of the demos was a game called Gran Turismo 2000 that later turned into Gran Turismo 3. It was clear that key improvements were in play, including more realistic reflections and lighting. There was a crazy amount of detail in models. For example, just look at the underpass. It is fully 3D modeled and not just a flat texture like in GT 2000s. Also, in GT 2000, a lot of the textures are limited to a 64 by 64 resolution, while in GT3 these textures are 128 by 128. The actual cars in Gran Turismo 3 featured more than 30 times the geometric detail and the polygon count compared to Gran Turismo 2 or any other PS1 racing game. We take reflections for granted now, but in 2001 most games did not have actual real-time reflections. Prior to the PS2 era, most games just put a scrolling texture on the models, like in Gran Turismo 1 or 2. Even some Dreamcast games like Tokyo Extreme Racer 2 did this, but in Gran Turismo 3, if you draw under trees, those trees will be reflected on the windows of your cars and on the ground on real time, despite the fact that the PS2 did not support cube maps. So developers used sphere maps instead. They also created a roughness simulation designed to vary the appearance of reflections based on the surface properties of each car. The difference between glass, plastic and metal is actually represented. So basically Gran Turismo 3 was a PBR game in 2001. There's also a similar thing going on with the wet road, although the geometry is duplicated to give the illusion of reflections, just like in Metal Gear Solid 2 and many other PS2 games. The sun is also a simple flat 2D transparent texture as well as the lens flares. There was no real post-processing used here, just a clever use of pretty low resolution sprites. They also faded out if the camera wasn't looking at them directly. The CPU boosted the ability to accurately model all kinds of physics and world systems. All of a sudden, things like procedural world generation, hair simulation, water simulation and facial animations were possible, thanks to this new technology. This contributed to the PS2's famous aesthetic. That's why the ground in Gran Turismo 3 had that cool heat haze effect that made the tracks feel real. And when the PS3 came out, developers were unable to recreate it because read, modify, write just wasn't as fast as it was in the PS2. In games like Metal Gear Solid 2, the rain was so advanced that even games nowadays aren't always that impressive. It uses a variety of different particles, all with varying velocity and direction. Water droplets also form on the screen and distort light passing through them, while also moving around realistically. Particles are also applied to the geometry of the map and on the bodies of characters. Reflections play a huge role too, both in indoor and outdoor scenes. One of the most impressive moments is the rushing water in the hallway. Just look at the amount of particles in that scene. MGS2 also features depth of field and motion blur all in real time, but many PS2 games are famous for realistic water rendering, and the most famous of these is probably Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. They use the vector unit to aid with the water calculations, computed reflections and then sent it to the graphics synthesizer in one pass. In reality, the Motion engine is not a single chip. It actually combines a MIPS CPU, clocked at 294 MHz with two coprocessors and various other controller chips, memory and interfaces. All of these systems run in parallel. Nowadays many people call the PS2 the weakest of the 6th generation consoles, but in the right hands, the PlayStation 2 could outperform any other console in that generation. It utilized two vector units for 3D processing and a fast 4MB EDRAM for rendering, often relying on raw, parallel processing power over traditional PC-style rendering. Despite being notoriously difficult to program for. But it allowed full voice acting, orchestral soundtracks and completely real-time cinematic cutscenes. The PS2's aesthetic revolves around this hazy, almost dreamlike filter that looked like it was layered over every game. In reality, it was just the result of the PS2's GPU called the graphics synthesizer, and developers using pair vertex lighting. It gave this soft, blurred look to almost everything. Environments like the forests in Shadow of the Colossus or the castle from Haunting Grounds feel so much more mystical thanks to the GPU. It makes you keep exploring the soft, foggy world instead of showing you everything at once. The game features huge landscapes with high-intensity bloom lighting with eye adaptation and exposure. The game essentially simulates the intensity of light based on the position of the camera. When you're in a dark room, outside light appears overexposed. But standing outside and looking into a dark room presents the opposite effect. Then we have motion blur, and unlike many other PS2 video games, in Shadow of the Colossus, velocity is also taken into consideration. The game also uses stencil shadows that are masked and filtered with a soft shadow look. This is pretty advanced even compared to Doom 3, which only featured hard shadows. Another key element is the use of texture layers for the fur of the characters. They use 3 to 6 layers of transparent textures to create a 3D fur look, since the PS2 didn't have programmable shaders yet. Parallaxed appearance of these layers really contributed to the 3-dimensional look of the fur. Sony claimed the GPU could push upwards of 75 million polygons per second. In real games though, with textures and effects, more realistically it was like 15 or 20 million. Another important thing to mention when it comes to the PS2 is real-time data streaming. While Shadow of the Colossus is a great example, I think the GTA games are even more famous when it comes to their open worlds. The reason behind San Andreas' seamless open world, consisting of multiple cities and the countryside, is because it was streamed into the console's memory in real time. Most developers implemented a level of detail system. Areas near the player are rendered in full quality with all geometric detail. Medium distance objects use simplified meshes, and everything in the forward distance is rendered using sprites that are basically 2D images. Jak and Daxter was one of the first games that used this type of data streaming and stopped relying on loading screens. The transitions can be pretty obvious, but thanks to the fog it helps mask it a little bit. For example, Team Silent used the high frame rate of the PlayStation 2 to create a beautiful swirling fog effect by scrolling many different transparent textures. They also implemented real-time dynamic shadows projected by a local shadowcaster, which was the flashlight on James' jacket. They basically created soft stencil shadows on the PS2. Silent Hill 3 was another step forward visually, so much that even today most people still consider it the best looking PS2 game, and honestly, it's hard to argue with that. On one hand, the polygon count increased significantly compared to the second game, but the biggest difference is the texture resolution. Douglas's model is 8700 polygons and is built from multiple 256 resolution textures. And I want to point out that this graphics work was done back when programmable shaders didn't exist yet. On top of that, they implemented an early version of bump mapping. When light hits the floor, the shadows appear to bounce back from the tiles. They achieved this by rendering the floor geometry twice, with the second floor texture layer slightly offsetting the direction of the light. Overall, the PlayStation 2 is the perfect example of a supercomputer that was deliberately made for a single purpose. Every chip, every electronic part was made for one purpose: to be the best at video games. And I think they achieved it.